Hello, and welcome to Lore Watch, roundtable freeform discussion about lore in your favorite media. I'm your host, Joe Perez, one of several lore-focused folks from Blizzard Watch, and I've got my dungeon diving companion with me today, Matt and Rossi. How you doing today, Matt?
I have been playing Paladin in Diablo 4, and I no longer wish to do anything else with my life.
This is pretty monumental. We'll probably talk about this on the main cast because this is Matt. I only play barbarians. Rossi saying that he likes the paladin.
Oh God, it is amazing. And also, there's little story bits. We were talking about something else today, but I want to throw this little bit in there. They've added tiny little bits in the dialogue that they weren't there for other characters that really talk about that whole concept of this is a paladin. Like this is not some barbarian who just lumbered in or a druid returning home. This person is a paladin.
Mm-hmm.
They are not the same. So it's kind of cool. We will talk about it at some point, but today is not.
No, instead, we're going to be talking about something that has come in as a request from multiple listeners, and we do appreciate it. We do listen to you, and this mainly came from our Patreon subscribers. But just as a reminder, if there's questions you want us to cover or something you want us to do as a topic for a show, you can go ahead and send those in to podcast@blizzardwatch.com. We ask that you specify the show that it is for, as well as any special pronunciation of your name. You can also hit us up on our Discord server, which is where these a rather large mountain of requests came from for this one. We have the Q and Podcast Questions channel, which is open to everybody. Same rules apply as the email. But we have the Patreon Q and Podcast Questions channel. We tend to look there first as a way of saying thank you to our Patreon subscribers for helping us keep the lights on. And for better or worse, you wonderful folks at home wanted us to talk about, well, the Icewind Dale trilogy. And for those of you that may not know what it is, the Icewind Dale trilogy is something that came out in the late 80s, 1988, I believe the first book was released. It's an epic fantasy novel by R.A. Salvatore, one of the most celebrated, I would say, fantasy D&D writers of all time. He's up there. Where they tell the tale.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I was gonna say unless your name is
Ed
and then
Greenwood.
I forgot his name. Yeah, unless your name's Ed Greenwood, nobody has contributed more to the Forgotten Realms than like literally R.A. Salvatore could do the old the line from The Simpsons. He could say, "Unless you're R.A. Salvatore, you're stealing my bit." It's kind of amazing that it all started with like this book series, which, as far as I understand it, they didn't necessarily know they were even going to get a trilogy out of this.
No, they didn't, and we're going to talk about that a little bit, I guess. But like that is a really good point to start with it, and why I think these are such celebrated novels and kind of very important novels in terms of Dungeons and Dragons. This really sort of, while there were D&D books before this and after it, or stories that took place in
Oh
that
yeah,
universe.
some of them are some of my favorites. There's a really great one, the Falling Mystara. But go ahead. Sorry.
No, you're good. I mean, we can talk about the stuff that, like, before this we had oh, bloody heck, I can't even remember. Wasn't the Writers of Kryn were after, wasn't it? It was like 90s?
I'm not sure. I know that the Dark Sun ones were a little
No,
later than these.
84 for Dragonlance. Sorry.
Dragonlance. Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Dragonlance came first. My
Yeah.
bad. I thought you were saying Dark Sun for some reason.
No, and then before that was what is it? Norton's Quag Keep in 1978. Like there were novels that existed beforehand and some that were very epic. But nothing really mainstreamed D&D storytelling or storytelling that had its base in D&D quite like the Icewind Dale trilogy. And what Matt said about it really sort of influencing the contribution or character of Forgotten Realms is kind of an understatement almost. I don't
Yeah.
I don't think they expected, like Matt said, I don't think they expected that this was going to be as big of a thing as it was, so much so that when they finished the original story, the first two novels of the original trilogy were not New York Times bestsellers. It was the last one of the trilogy that actually made it onto the New York Times bestseller list, showing that folks beyond just D&D players were interested in these stories. And then from that spawned two more trilogies and what came to be a series of games modules in a world of just wonderful and terrible things of Forgotten Realms.
I think too another thing to point out here is that everything that came after, that's directly set in Icewind Dale or the area around it, the 10 towns, they were smart in that they didn't keep going back to the exact same well.
Yes.
The novel trilogy that we're going to discuss involves a specific group of characters. Those characters do not appear in the Icewind Dale video games.
No.
And much to their benefit. It's much more that the 10 towns and Icewind Dale itself are characters than these characters. As for Frostmaiden, it came out 20, almost 30 years later.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not, it is very much a continuation of the locale, but not of the characters. And in a weird sort of way, that really kind of explains why it's been so lasting. The characters have also continued. They've got multiple novels that they've appeared in. Drizzts is ubiquitous.
Yeah, let's talk about the characters that appear in the trilogy. Words Are Hard. Let's introduce them before we talk about the individual stories. So you've already mentioned Drizzt. Who is Drizzt?
Drizzt is a halfling thief. No, I'm kidding. I'm sorry. The book Drizzt is actually somewhat of a side character for most of the first book. He's not the real focus. The focus is actually somebody else. But Drizzt is a Drow Ranger. Sometimes it's kind of hard to say for sure if he's just a ranger or if he's ranger something else.
He was frankly, like a Ranger Blade Singer type thing. He did a whole lot of magic that wasn't just Drow magic. But
this was second edition was out when these books started coming, and third edition was a solid 10 years away. So the rules that the games and stories, the novels were adapting were pretty loose.
And
they went with stuff, but Drizzt is basically he's that thing that I think we all like love, and yet at the same time kind of realize is a little cheesy. He's the good one of a bad group.
The fun fact, he was actually an accident too. Like he was not originally a character planned for this series in Salvatore's storytelling. But one of the early versions of the book had a character that was even more milquetoast than Drizzt was at the time. And so his publishers told him, you need to replace this character. Nobody's going to like this character. And so he came up with Drizzt on the fly.
What's really funny is he actually split the character that he had originally in half, because one half becomes Drizzt, the other half becomes an assassin named Artemis Interi. And we're coming back to that guy. But by breaking them in half, he made two much more interesting characters, especially Artemis Interi, who is fascinating. But also, I mean, Drizzt is... I say mean things about Drizzt sometimes because to a certain degree, some of it isn't his fault. The fact that every World of Warcraft character who rolled a hunter for a year straight was naming it some variation on Drizzt wasn't Drizzt's fault. It was the fact that Drizzt had become, by 2004, so ubiquitous that literally, if you knew about D&D, you knew who Drizzt was. Much more so, and Joe had mentioned earlier that the Kryn books came out in '84. Nobody has name recognition like Drizzt.
No, nobody has name recognition as any of these characters comparatively to any other D&D book that's released.
Yeah, not even Elminster.
He's probably the closest one, really.
He's the closest one, but even he doesn't have quite the name recognition of these characters. So Drizzt's your Dark Elf Ranger. He comes from the city of Menzoberranzan, and he's sort of he is the, doesn't talk much, keeps to himself, grim character of the book. But at the same time, he's kind of, they give him enough of a sense of humor that you could actually believe he could get along with the other characters and be their friend, which is useful. I say by the third book, I feel like it's getting a little out of hand, but in the first two, it works pretty well. Drizzt's friend is Bruenor Battlehammer, is the dwarf character, and he is central casting's idea of what a dwarf should be.
And to be fair, he moves. He's there as your typical dwarf, like your Tolkien-esque dwarf, but he's also central to moving the story along because he is the glue that ties all of the party together.
Yeah, and he's like strangely dad-like,
Well, there's
strangely
a reason for
fatherly.
that.
Yeah.
For
Well,
two of
he's
the characters.
essentially he's essentially the foster father for two different characters. And those characters are Caddy Bree, who is kind of the human. Is she human or is she like?
She's human. She's
Human,
she's
yeah.
the adopted human daughter of
Uh,
King Bruenor Battlehammer.
yeah, and she's the team rogue sort of. Although she's much more interested in shooting people than stealing things.
She's more
And
of a fighter, but yeah.
I feel like they gave her. Oh, you know what? With Regis around, you're right. I will say fighter instead.
Which we haven't talked about Regis yet. So we'll get there.
Yeah. But then there's Bruenor Battlehammer, who not Bruenor. Sorry, I said Bruenor. Wolfgar, who is the son of a tribesman outside, one of the Uthgard, outside of the 10 tribes, who, when he was very young, took part in a raid on Icewind Dale, and Bruenor knocked him out. And when he woke up, Bruenor's like, "Well, I could kill you, but I don't like murdering people who can't fight back. So I will give you a chance to make up for what you did."
Yeah,
by serving me.
He actually did more than that. He saved him because if I remember correctly, after that raid, the folks of the 10 towns were actually like
absolutely wanted to
summarily executing any barbarians that were not quite dead. So like he chose to save Wolfgar.
Yeah, basically, even though at this time, and this plot will come up later,
for 5 years and a day of service. That I remember that. Yeah.
But also in addition to that, the reason Bruenor could do that was even though he was living in the Icewind Dale area, he was king of a dwarven empire that had fallen to ruin. But he was still king. He still had the tribe behind him.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, when he said, no, you're not going to kill that, he's still basically a child. They're like, he's big enough to raid. And he goes, he's only big enough to raid because he's a giant. They're all huge. He's still a child. I'm not letting you murder him. I will, he will serve me for 5 years and a day, and we'll see what happens. And so Wolfgar basically, he's kind of interesting in that he is this barbarian type character, but at the same time,
in a lot of ways,
he's also kind of
he's almost the main character of the stories in a lot of ways.
Yeah, at least in these original
the original
books,
trilogy, yeah.
And it's funny because you get to see a lot of different aspects of Wolfgar. Massive temper, extremely loyal. Once he decides he's your friend, then that's it. And at the same time, not a moron, which is really important because barbarian characters are often portrayed as kind of dumb, which is weird because Conan's the most famous barbarian in fiction of all time, and he was extremely intelligent.
Mm-hmm.
But most times people play them, big dumb guy. But Wolfgar was pretty smart. He actually picked up things pretty quickly. He picks up a lot of dwarven customs really quick.
Which that comes into play later, and we'll talk about that in, I think, a little bit. We have one more character that we really need to sort of introduce, so we should probably talk about Regis.
Gwen Hyfar is this cat. No, I'm kidding. Regis is the actual rogue I mentioned earlier. And Regis...
A.K.A. Rumblebelly.
Yeah, Regis, a.k.a. Rumblebelly, a.k.a. Oh God, he's
the
back.
Spider.
Yeah, Regis is sort of he's like the driving force of a lot of the misadventures these people get into. In the first novel,
he's what if Bilbo was a worse person?
Yeah, what if Bilbo was almost doing it on purpose?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so he is sort of why magical stuff is happening, but at the same time, you have to point out that the beginning part of the story, when Wolfgar becomes ward to Bruenor, when the Uthgard and other barbarians are attacking, it's Regis who saves the day because no one's listening. No one is going to follow and help unite together. The 10 towns are not going to unite to fight the Uthgard. And he reveals something that becomes central to the entire book, is that in addition to being very sneaky and very persuasive, he has a magic gem he can use to hypnotize people.
Which comes into play in the third book because the Halfling's Gem, which as the title goes, which we'll talk about later.
Yeah, but even here, he uses it to convince the town's leadership to work together. And if he didn't do that, they'd all be dead. So is he a good person? No. But is he evil? Also, no, he's just extremely self-motivated, and the whole reason he's up here in the cold
He
is that he did something that made him have to run away from where he was originally from, which I believe is Calamshan.
yeah, I believe that is the name of it. I cannot remember it off the top of my head, but Callum something.
Yeah.
I will say to put it in D&D terms for those of you listeners that play, Regis is essentially the open embodiment of chaotic neutral.
Yes, very much so.
Wolfgar is your chaotic good, because of course he is. Bruenor is also chaotic good. Katie Bree is neutral good. And then you have Drizzt Do'Urden, who is also chaotic good. These are like, there's a reason why we make a joke when we talk about alignments in D&D that everybody falls into the chaotic good category, and I blame this book series mainly for it.
It certainly plays a role in the fact that this is like sort of in a weird sort of way if you've seen the more recent, not the most recent, but the 90s versions of the Mummy films, you kind of get the same sense that Rick and Evie are both willing to break all sorts of rules.
Mm-hmm. As
And
long
of
as it
course
serves a greater
Jonathan
good.
and Jonathan is just straight up what's in it for me, baby.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, they're all friends with each other. They're loyal to each other. This is a very similar group in that they do these things partially, for noble reasons, but mostly because, hey, we live here, or you took something from me, or and then when one of them gets that happening to them, the rest of them will come together. Even Regis, although sometimes he will just run and save his own neck, but oftentimes he will come back and sort of be the rogue with a heart of gold for long enough for them to pull through. But oddly enough, this whole backstory is just the opening of the book.
Yeah.
This is barely even there, and it's this. You're like, wow, this could have been the whole book. What?
The thing about it is as an early D&D novel, one of the things that it does that I think is really important that I will say that I think got lost to time is it was very much how traditional D&D parties met before the like trope of you meet in a tavern. That became a trope for whatever reason. But before that, most campaigns, most whatever red books or red boxes or things that would be the equivalent of campaign books or settings, you started with something similar to this, where your characters kind of already knew each other in some way. And then like you had a backstory that tied you all together. This was that little backstory. This was the events that sort of tied the party together. It was that glue moment, and
Mm-hmm.
it became an important thing that was repeated throughout most of the D&D novels. And I'm not going to like include most of the Drizzt books in there because Drizzt has appeared in I think 17 or 18 novels
Yeah, he's
at
been
this
around.
point. He's been around. But when you look at stuff like, the Dragonlance series, and you look at any of the I think Black Company books or anything from Ed Greenwood or any of those others, which Ed Greenwood is the creator of Forgotten Realms. I feel that's also an important little
Yeah,
tidbit here.
absolutely.
Um, they all start with something that ties these folks together, whether it's events or things that happen around them, like the case with Wolfgar and Bruenor. Like that being a thing that ties those two characters together is very much what would happen in a D&D game. And I think this is why it resonated so well with people who played the game at that point, which was they were seeing their type of storytelling being published with these characters and establishing that this is how like events occur. This is how stories unravel. It was
Yeah, it kind of does have a similar sensation to that bit where you start off playing and you do like one or two shot adventures that are like just go there, do this sort of thing. Maybe prepare for something bad at the end, and then as it broadens out, by the end of the book, you've basically seen them go and confront a force of like we still don't even really know exactly what the thing was.
mhm.
The Crystal Shard is of the book's title. It's never entirely clear if it's a god, if it's a demon of some sort, or a devil. Is it a magical artifact? It's like we know it's a sapient crystal, but we don't know how it got there or what made it. We know that like lots of people have wanted to use it, including some pretty bad people that are going to be coming up. Basically, we should talk a little bit about Car Cassel, because Car Cassel is essentially simultaneously the villain of the book and also the most pitiable character in the book. In that he is
Fair.
he wanted to be a wizard, and he is barely adequate at it.
And it should be noted that he was an apprentice of Mordecai the Red, a red wizard, which at the time
Yes.
is incredibly bad. If you've seen the D&D movie, red wizards are bad.
Red Wizards of Thay are the worst people imaginable. They're so bad that the Archlich Sazas Tom, who lives amongst them and is one of them, is only moderately the worst. Like, there's worse ones than him, and he is again a lich who is quite experienced in necromancy and doing bad things with it. But Cassel, his mentor basically was like, just die. You're useless to me. I need someone who can actually do things. And when left to die in the Spine of the World Mountains, which is this enormous ridge of mountains, I believe to the north of Icewind Dale and the others members of the 10 Towns, it's like practically impassable. It's one of the reasons the barbarians don't come down very often, because it's real hard to get through these mountains. Left to die there, Cassel is pretty much doomed until he essentially trips over this crystal shard, which again, its name is Krishinab. I can't never say this properly. Krishinabon, I believe is
Krishinabon, yep.
Yeah, it's kind of like Cinnabon, but even more evil. The crystal shard does all sorts of weird stuff. It's basically like it's a wishing rock almost.
Kinda, yeah. Almost. Like it infuses him with a lot of great power. While it is a sentient thing, it gives him a lot of power and allows him to do things like amass a rather large army. And stop me if you've heard this one before. An army of goblins with orcs and ogres and giants that are at his beck and call, and which he uses to build a large tower. Sound familiar? little Tolkien-esque there.
Doesn't he use the the tower is it's a replica of Krishinabon, just enormous.
Correct. Yeah,
it's like a gigantic version of Krishinabon. Like, they have to build it, but he uses Krishinabon's power to shape it into the thing it becomes.
And it also allows him to have it also allows him to have a partnership, I guess we'll put it, because it's tenuous at best with Ertu, which is a Baelor.
Really, really scary demon.
Yeah, Baelors are not exactly friendly folks.
Well, I mean, if you've seen, again, we mentioned Lord of the Rings before, which just was again, you've seen the scene in the mine. It's that gigantic thing is a Baelor. That's pretty much how they're portrayed in D&D as well.
Yeah, I think they're called like Tanari, or like I think that's like the most dominant race of demons from the abyss. Yeah, like
that's Ertu. Ertu's fun, by the way.
Ertu is fun, but Ertu wants Krishinabon, wants the power of it, but because Akar Kessel has it, he's able to essentially look Ertu eye to eye for at least a while.
Yeah, and that part of the thing is, while this is all going on, the only person who doesn't seem to understand that this is happening is Kessel himself. Krishinabon is infiltrating his mind. It's not as simple as just grabbing control of him. It's just warping him. It's making him more greedy, more selfish, more control obsessed, more power hungry, because it has things it wants, and none of them are sticking around in the frozen wastes of the north, conquering a bunch of little towns. This is not up to Krishinabon's standards, but it's up to Cassel's.
By the way, because I don't know why, but talking about this like teleported this into my brain. I remember that the tower was named Krishal Tirith.
Yeah, that's right. You are correct.
I don't know why, but that just teleported into my brain right then. Sorry,
well, we were talking about the JKR, the Tolkien inspirations, and that's a big one. But
sorry, please continue.
You get all this happening. There's the training montage of young Wolfgar, he goes from being an indentured servant to practically Wolfgar's kid.
Well, in Wolfgar, Brunor asks Drizzts specifically to train him at the time of his servitude being coming to an end. And there is a defining moment, because I think this is where this is a stereotypical D&D moment, but is very well, I think, well received. is Wolfgar takes on the task of killing Icewind Death, uh, Ingolocustum. Wow, sorry, Ingolocustum, a gigantic frost or white dragon. That's his task. That is his last thing in order to essentially be free of servitude. And he's able to do it, but he's also able to do it with the help of Drizzt, who uses his drow magic and his stealth to help Wolfgar essentially survive and harry the dragon until the dragon is and which is also where Drizzt gets one of his iconic sabers from, or scimitar, Icing Death, as so named after the dragon itself, which gives him the ability to become flameproof. This is the birth, or the original like first thing of Drizzt becoming just this weird, overpowered character that will come back later on throughout the series. It's
but at the same time, it is also pretty familiar if you've ever been playing D&D.
Yes.
And you kill the big monster, and there's a treasure loot, and there's one thing that just we all know who that's for.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody else in this group was going to use a scimitar. Maybe Caddy Bree, but she much prefers bows and arrows.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was definitely going to be that. So then you get the typical Akar Cassel decides to go conquer the 10 towns, and this time there's Regis is not able to get them all together and hypnotize them into doing his bidding. So this leads to the group basically coming up with their own defense plan. One of them is that Wolfgar has to take the dragon head. I think it's his head. Maybe it's just his horns. I'm not sure.
It's the horns.
Okay, thank you. And he challenges the guy who was king of his people to a fight and kills him. He kills the guy.
Hefstag. I can't remember. Okay. Hefstag the elk or something like that.
Yeah, he kills him. Takes over. He becomes the king of that tribe, and meanwhile, Drizzt is knows about demons because he's a drow.
Well, yeah, because
he realizes
specifically they call it out. This is where like Menzoberranzan gets like fleshed out a little bit, because they talk about like Drizzt's time as a male drow in Menzoberranzan, which is not a good time. You are essentially either fodder or a slave. But he remembers a lot of the demonic interweavings that people would do there, which is how he's able to recognize Ertu, and then is able to essentially at this point summon Ertu, challenge Ertu, and then with his panther companion Gwenvar, and the now scimitar Icing Death, conveniently allowing him to dispel flames of magic nature that an Ertu might actually summon, banishes it back to the abyss for 100 years.
Yep. And then from there, you basically have the big everyone, they now have the new army of barbarians. They've got the original army of dwarves and the people of the 10 towns. They've managed to somewhat unite them all together to basically, for lack of a better word, perform a holding action. Like just keep the goblins and other creatures occupied.
They keep the evil army occupied while the main party lays siege internally to Krishaltir.
Yeah. And they finally get to him, but I think Drizzt gets there first because he's real sneaky.
Mm-hmm.
But then he gets, Akar Cassel is not impressed, which basically puts him in a giant cage of magic light, because light is not something that drow love to be exposed to at this point in time. We've seen it come and go in terms of how bad it is. In the book, it's pretty bad. And finally, Wolfgar, leading the barbarians, comes in along with Regis, and Regis has been held prisoner in the tower for this whole time, because Akar Cassel's like, I don't want the guy with the hypnotic gem messing with my stuff. And Brunar and Caddy Bree and Wolfgar come in, and they're finally like fighting him directly. He teleports himself to, I don't remember, it's some kind of gigantic mound.
Kelvin's Cairn.
Thank you. I'm really bad on names today. I apologize, everybody.
I'm remembering stuff that I have forgotten because it's jogging the memory, because I haven't read these books in ages.
Yeah, but when they start brawling, they end up teleporting to this top of this mountain, and then at this part, the magic stone, like the crystal shard, it essentially has been trying to kill Kessel off this whole time. Because, like, on the one hand, I like having someone to manipulate, but on the other hand, this guy's a moron. So it finally decides to, like, overheat and melt enough snow to destabilize the snow cap so that Kessel is killed in an avalanche. The Kushinabon is buried there. It can't get to the light of the sun, which is, oddly enough, its power source. It's like, well, I can't control the orcs anymore, and they get away. The orcs leave, and the people of the 10 towns are like, okay, we've essentially gotten away with everything, except that Bruenor got really messed up. Like, doing his fathery tanky thing where he's like, I can't let them hurt my son, and I can't let them hurt my daughter, and I can't think too hard about the fact that my son and daughter aren't actually related and are smooching. He gets himself really badly hurt, and as a result of this, he gets from Drizzt a promise that he'll help go to Mithril Hall, which is the place where Bruenor and his people originally came from.
Yeah, his ancestral hall where he is king, or will be king, I guess would be the best way to put it.
That's basically the story. I mean, we glossed the heck out of this, but that's the first book, The Crystal Shard. And the patterns are set in this one, but there's also a lot of stuff that's just there because nobody had any idea what would land. Like, for lack of a better word, I feel like Regis and Bruenor barely get any characterization.
Which is when you get into the second book, which is the Streams of Silver, where they are going for the Mithril Hall. Those characters get much more fleshed out, including, like, Regis gets. This is where you find out his backstory and his sort of why he's so eager to go with the party. It's not that he's grateful that they rescued him from Krishal Tirith. It's that he's running from Artemis and Terry, who was sent by Pasha Pook of Kalimsham to get back the ruby that Regis has stolen. Because, again, he's a thief. He's your stereotypical halfling rogue at this point, or halfling thief, really.
One thing that them thiefies do is get people mad because they stole stuff from them.
Yeah,
and that's really a big part of this.
But then it also goes into the backstory of, Bruenor and the dwarves and why they lost Mithril Hall. And they take a more central role, and it goes into more in the relationship between Katie Bree and Wolfgar and how that blossoms. It starts to become sort of like that second campaign, right? We're going to run out of time if we just recap all of them. So I kind of want to just go through real quickly this and the next one, and then kind of talk about how these set the stage, because they are important books, right?
Yeah. Basically, this one, the second one, Stream of Silver, is your big. I want to say, if you want to think of it as the middle arc, and if you use a D&D campaign to model it, the first book is basically levels 1 to 5. You start getting strong, you start getting magic goodies, you start, you hold up, and by the end, there's an actual real serious looming threat that you manage to defeat. Streams of Silver is basically 5 to 10. You're strong now, and you can finally go up after that business that you wanted to deal with, but at the same time, there's more character stuff. Caddy Bree gets a whole arc where Artemis and Terry, goes up against her, and it's kind of interesting that in this book, initially she ends up showing fear and tells him what he wants to know, but then she's like, no, I can't believe I did that, and has an arc where she basically turns herself into the warrior that she needs to be in future books. So that's cool, and it comes up again later, much later, a different book series even. But she does have an arc against Interi. Interi is Drizzt's dark reflection, which is ironic because he is, of the two, he is the paler by a lot. Mm-hmm. But the two of them are very similar in a lot of ways, even though they're also very different in a lot of ways. This happens to Drizzt a lot. Remind me sometimes to talk about Jarlaxle. But in this book, that's Anteri originally is just coming to kill Regis, if at all possible, and get the gem back. That's all he's there for. He doesn't become Drizzt's enemy until the end of the book because of what happens in the book. But basically, other than that, the story is going to Mithril Hall, fighting the giant shadow dragon, whose name I am not going to be able to remember.
Shimmergloom.
Shimmergloom, thank you. And
Who's in charge of
dealing
the
with the
Duergar.
fact, yeah, and also dealing with the fact that there's a lot of prejudice towards Drow that Drizzt has to deal with, and the rest of the group has to deal with because Drizzt's with them.
Mm-hmm.
So you see that like in Silvermoon this bit. But Catti-brie, I think her story is the most outright just the hero's journey type thing,
Yeah,
where she
because
goes from callow youth to actual seasoned warrior.
that's really one of the things. Like she steps up at the end of the book, right? So uh she is the one that winds up making plans to like work with the dwarves of Citadel Adbar, work with the barbarians of Wolfgar's tribe to make like an actual battle plan to retake Mithril Hall, which has been overrun by Duergar under the command of Shimmergloom. um like she's the one that is the rallying force. She's the one that takes command, and she is very much in this moment a dwarf general in applying all of the things that her adopted father had taught her. And that's where the story of the book closes out, with her setting that story in motion, but then also Drizzt and Wolfgar beginning their chase to rescue Regis from Anteri, which then leads us into the third and final book of the original trilogy, The Halfling's Gem. So,
Yeah, and one thing I should mention is the book ends where you think it's going to end.
yeah,
Although Terry steals Regis, but Clan Battlehammer reclaims the hall. Bruenor is now officially king. It's pretty obvious that while he is officially king, Catti-brie is the one doing all the work in terms of like getting everything set up. Like she's making all the arrangements because she serves both as a liaison to the barbarians that serve Wolfgar and the dwarves that serve Bruenor. But she's the one actually giving both groups orders because
mhm.
Drizzt and Wolfgar have left. They are straight up. They're trying to go
Al-
chase Regis down.
Although at book 2, you are left thinking that Bruenor is dead. I should point that out.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
It's the beginning of book 3 where you find out that he is not dead. But yeah, like it's in book 3 is sort of like the main crux of it is this chase. It's this and Terry playing a game of cat and mouse with Drizzt and Wolfgar, um, and taking him to Calimport, where Regis is being held captive, but also Drizzt's partner, Guinevere, the panther. I think she's a panther. I can never remember.
She is
Uh,
a panther. She is a black panther because she's a statue, a figurine of wondrous
yes.
power, which means that she doesn't always there, but she can be summoned for like a certain amount of time every so often.
Yeah.
So he doesn't have her with her constantly, but she's always with him, like her presence.
Yeah. And there's a lot of culminating moments here. It's, I'm trying to think how to phrase this because there's so much that happened. But it ends where you think it would end here, as each character has like sort of their massive arc, with all of the heroes arriving in Calimport. They storm into Pashapook's palace. They find a pack of were-rats, which werewolves in D&D second edition were extraordinarily rare, but there were other lycanthropes. There were actually a lot of other lycanthropes like were-rats, and they were awful. And this was no exception.
Yeah, were-rats are terrifyingly awful in D&D.
And these were-rats were led by, if I remember correctly, Rassiter, which I remember looking at it and going, wow, they just couldn't think of a name for this one.
I thought it was a reference to the Great Mouse Detective, to be upfront with you.
I also thought it was too. But then you have Bruenor, Catti-brie, and Wolfgar showing up to fight the horde of were-rats, while Drizzt finally gets to duel Artemis and Terry, which is sort of like this heroic moment. They duel in the sewers of the streets of Calimport, but the duel is left unfinished when Anteri, mortally wounded, in an effort to escape, calls to everyone that Drizzt, who had been hiding his appearance with a magical mask that he had acquired earlier, is actually a drow. Which then starts to freak everybody out. This goes back to what Matt was talking about with that whole dealing with the prejudice of being a drow. And then basically the rest of the party has to drop what they're doing to rescue Drizzt from the very frightened and very angry crowd of people.
Because keep in mind too, drow aren't hated just because people don't like the color of their skin. Drow are hated because they worship Lolth, who,
actively
yeah,
kidnap people, women, children,
and
experiment
feeds
on
them to
them,
spider monsters.
sacrifice
Yeah,
them to spider monsters, like
yeah.
yeah, use them for dark magic. It is not an unfounded hate. And Drizzt is not like the other Drow, and I'm air quoting that, but the vast majority of them are. This all culminates with them breaking into the throne room of where Pook imprisons Drizzt and his friends in Tartarus with the help of the Taroscoop, I believe is what it is. It was an artifact
Yeah, I just
straight
remember
from
it was like a big, yeah, big ringy thing.
it was an artifact straight from the D&D second edition books. If I remember correctly, that would basically be able to send people to essentially one of the layers of hell. And this is where Regis has his big heroic moment. He takes the one that controls the portal to break them out, essentially. And then it's where and Katie Bree winds up falling unconscious. Like a whole bunch of like weird stuff happens. Drizzt sends basically rescues Katie Bree by fighting against a horde of demons. And then in the end, Pashapuk dies by Guinevere, who gets freed from his clutches and command. Everybody gets united once again. The soldiers in the surrounding Dwarven Kingdom, the barbarian tribes, and the human cities reclaim Mithril Hall, and everything turns out well. But of course, at this point, Anteri is not dead because he escaped in the big kerfuffle that happens, and it plans his vengeance on Drizzt, which
Yeah, he
is
doesn't like having he had a job, and whilst he did the job in that he got Regis to Kalimshan, he does not like the idea that he can be balked. So now it's a personal thing. Now it's you hurt my reputation, and you actually stood up to me in a fight. Neither of those are things I can forgive. So I will be coming back to kill you later. But first, I want to ruin your life.
yeah.
To be fair, you know. So that's how the book essentially ends. It's like it sets up the next next appearances of Drizzt in various other books. What's really messed up though is that each of these books, especially the first two, you don't feel like the third book actually ever has to happen. Like the next book
Yeah.
always feels like it might not, that you might never hear or see from these people. Like definitely as a case where I don't think they knew what they had. Joe, you mentioned that this one, it was the third one that made the bestseller list,
Yeah.
which is a big deal because I think only before that, only the Dragonlance books had done that for the D&D brand, if I'm not mistaken.
I think so. It's been a while. But like it was very rare for anything extremely fantasy related to make it to the New York Times bestseller list. So it was kind of a huge deal when the third book of this essentially got onto there, but it did a lot more because it opened the doorway for a lot of people. And one of the criticisms that was levied against this, and I think it's not unfounded, is that the Icewind Dale trilogy borrows fairly heavily from Tolkien-esque lore and a lot of Tolkien-esque storytelling and a lot of the story beats that happen in the Fellowship of the Ring. There are a lot of crossovers, there are a lot of weird similar moments, but that also is very endemic of D&D at the time, right? It's very much the people who were playing D&D during that time frame were very much fans of Tolkien, at least in some capacity. It is very rare for somebody who was playing Dungeons and Dragons to not have read any of the Tolkien books or not be aware of Tolkien's contribution to modern fantasy at the time.
And even if they weren't, even if somehow someone playing didn't, the people who created the game absolutely did, and they meant it.
Yeah, 100%.
You know.
And go like the idea of the third book hitting the New York Times bestsellers list did something important in the 80s that I remember barely. I was still like a young child. Or no, it was 1990 when the last book was, I think, published. It opened up a doorway for people that had potentially never read or been interested in fantasy before to see this novel show up on the New York Times bestseller list, because at the time frame when something hit the bestseller list, it was also front and center in every bookstore, right? Every chain bookstore, every major bookstore had an entire section at the very front of the store with the New York Times bestsellers. And people would oftentimes pick up those books because they were very front and center. And the internet didn't really exist like it does today. You couldn't just look up a bunch of reviews. You couldn't just, go and read samples online, and like watch a YouTube video that explained to you why you should or should not like this book. Instead, you were greeted by this, and in a space that was dominated by like spy thrillers and war novels and science fiction novels, which were relatively popular at the time. Maybe not so much as it is today, but still very popular, especially at the end of the 80s, moving into the 90s. These fantasy novels became front and center, and it also started doing something really important, which was it also introduced people to tangential fantasy stories. So let's say you didn't know that Tolkien existed. This was often put on tables or in the same facing of these places with the Fellowship trilogy as well as The Hobbit. So if you picked this up because you saw it on the New York Times bestsellers list and you liked it, you'd go back and you'd pick those up potentially. Again, keep in mind, this is all happening in a world where the internet did not really exist. It became very important to sort of the 90s, I want to say, takeover of fantasy, because not only did the Icewind Dale trilogy books happen, but the Riders of Kryn, the Dragonlance novels happened. And those were very important, like court intrigue and adventure novels that dealt with a lot of high fantasy concepts. Go ahead, Matt.
I also remember the Ravenloft novels were pretty big at the time.
Yeah.
And a lot of people that you'd later on see writing like lore for the vampire books cut their teeth on the Ravenloft novels. At least 3 times. And to the point where much later, after 2000, White Wolf actually paid Wizards of the Coast for a licensing fee so they could make their own Ravenloft book.
Mm-hmm.
Straight up, the circle came around again. So yeah, there's that period of expansion in a very real way. The Crystal Shard and the 2 other books in the Icewind Dale series was kind of like the standard bearer for this. It was like it was really approachable. Unlike a lot of the other books set in the Forgotten Realms, it didn't really require you to know much of anything about the Forgotten Realms. Like, you just kind of had to know these fishing villages lived in the north, and bad stuff keeps happening.
Yeah, and we should, like, the Forgotten Realms being the campaign setting from, what is it, like 87 to like 2000, somewhere in that range. That was like the setting.
Maybe even a little before that, but it was definitely, by the time these books came out, it was absolutely the main thing.
Yeah, it was created by Ed Greenwood, and this is where some of the importance also filters into it, because these books play a key point in sort of coalescing this. I think in the 60s, Ed Greenwood really started putting this setting together, and it was a series of magazine articles originally that were released first, and then the first real game product was in 1987, before this series of novels was released and before other ones set in Forgotten Realms were released. Forgotten Realms included a bunch of like, these stories helped shape what the Forgotten Realms would become, like including the island chains, making the Icewind Dale setting like a place that you could actually go, dealing outside of just the normal Sword Coast. And the success of the Icewind Dale trilogy sort of allowed them to flesh out these stories. This is where you get to the desert lands, because even the novels talk about the desert lands a little bit. It familiarizes people with the concept of Thay and the Red Wizards. It brings you introduction to Menzoberranzan and the Underdark in general, which, while players may have known about it, even in D&D second edition terms, the Underdark was this Umbra-esque, this ethereal, very dangerous place that if you wound up going to, you either had to be an extremely powerful adventurer to survive, or it was someplace that you went expecting that you were not coming back. This gave it more life. It wasn't just a series of tunnels anymore. And it really started solidifying that the Forgotten Realms was a cohesive place. And these stories and these characters you'll see pop up repeatedly throughout the entire history of not just the novels and not just the game publication, but also with the video games that were released set inside of the D&D setting. Like Pool of Radiance makes reference to him. Eye of the Beholder makes reference to him. Icewind Dale had its own game in 2000, as well as Neverwinter Nights. Baldur's Gate, a game that I know many of you have played because you've played Baldur's Gate 3, but Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 wouldn't exist without these novels and without the Forgotten Realms being solidified as like the D&D campaign place. These were incredibly important to it. These were also very informative, or I shouldn't say informative, very formative books for a lot of young writers that would then grow up to pen other like novels set inside of this. But it did a lot to legitimize gaming as a mainstream thing. And Matt more than I lived through what we call the Satanic Panic. I was still very young at that point.
I mean, I wasn't exactly a fossil. I was a teenager.
You were a teenager, but you have more of a. I was still like a child.
Yeah,
right?
I've got a straight up. I've got a quick story I can tell about it actually, because they used to have like there was a man who created tracts. We called them Chick Tracts because his name was Jack Chick. At least he said he was. We're not going to go into a whole detail about that, but there was a group of concerned parents that would bring them to school and pass them out to the kids and try to get the school board and so forth to ban D&D from schools, which wasn't really hard. They didn't have to do because there weren't enough of us who wanted to play it to make it a real problem. But I remember as I'm leaving school, and at the time I was a very slight child. I was very skinny. Very often someone would call me, her or she or girl, because I seriously, if you see me now, you would have no idea that I ever looked like this. But at the time, I was like 13, 14. I was often confused for a girl. Very long hair, very, very skinny. A woman comes to me and goes, excuse me, little girl. And I'm, already, this puts a spike up me because, teenage boy doesn't want to be called little girl. She starts explaining to me how bad this Dungeons and Dragons stuff is, and she shows me the tract, and I'm reading through it, and I go, man, there's no way you can use the spells in the player's handbook like this. I don't have any back guano. Do you have any back guano? Where am I going to get back guano? And there's this 5-minute thing of me driving this poor woman into like paroxysms of horror, saying, glass rods? Where do I even find one? The hardware store? Do I buy a dowel? What am I looking for? Before her other compatriots came and rescued her from the outraged girl, quotes, that was very mad that these were inaccurate tracts. So that's my Jack Chick story. But yes, it was all over the place. They made movies about it.
Yeah.
Like Mazes and Monsters. It just was everywhere.
The reason I bring it up is not necessarily just to highlight that, yes, this was dangerous or that people were feeling this way. It was more, it started to legitimize it, right? It started to push this into the hands of people that had dismissed it by buying into the Chick track or by buying into the propaganda about it, where these are
even
demonic
if just somebody
tones,
told
right?
you about it. Yeah, someone tells you that. It was definitely a time before people could just grab it, and because it was hard to find these books.
It was.
They weren't like in Walden Books didn't carry them until much later. You basically had to go to a hobby store and hope that they carried them or could get them delivered or what have you.
Or you had to order them from the back of a Dragon or Dungeon magazine because they were doing direct mail order at the time.
Yeah,
too.
but if you got Dragon or Dungeon magazine already, had access to it, then you probably already knew where to get it. It's one of those things. But Joe's completely right about the legitimization. These books made it so that people were reading these things.
Like they would read it not knowing that it was a D&D book, right? Like, because it wasn't presented as it was a Dungeons and Dragons book. It was presented as, a TSR publication, but they didn't know who TSR was. And it was Forgotten Realms, this big logo at the top. But like, they just thought that was like an overarching title for it. Like Forgotten Realms was the book series, and this was a subtitle within that book series, right? So they would read this and then they'd come back to it and be like, well, this isn't and then they would eventually get to the part where it would talk about like at the back of the books, it would talk about ordering the D&D like Forgotten Realms campaign setting, or what book was coming out next, or what box set was coming out next, because that was the thing that they would do, is they would advertise in the actual publication at the end of it. And they would see this and they'd be like, I just read a Dungeons and Dragons book. This isn't about summoning demons at all. And it would open that up to them, and sort of like helped pave a wave of normalization for this. And it started to make it more acceptable for an older generation to look at the younger generation that was playing this game. Like, I will literally, like Matt had his story about the Chick tracts. I remember being in grade school and wanting to read this book, and the librarian at the school at the time like was very staunchly against Dungeons and Dragons. She was very much on this is like the devil's worshiping type stuff, but she didn't know this was D&D. And then when I asked them to order it in for me, because you could do that at the time through public schools, they got it in. She would read whatever books were special ordered. She didn't know until she got to the end that it was a Dungeons and Dragons book. She actually, when I got my hands on it, she was like, this wasn't what I thought it was. And she was like, you guys don't do anything bad. Like, you just pretend to be adventurers that go around saving the world. I'm like, yeah, that's what we want to do. And she's like, so there's nothing, like, you're not casting spells or doing anything, like it's literally you're pretending to be a dwarf or an elf or a barbarian. Yep, that's pretty much it. Blew her mind. Absolutely blew her mind. But also caused her to drop this concept of it being something that was purely demonic. And
Yeah,
like,
in my case, my mother was already kind of into it just because she liked tweaking people off. But she sat down and read one of them. I think it was the player's handbook, and she was like, "This is just math.
it's just math.
I can't even believe you like this. You hate doing math." I'm like, "Well, I hate doing math for no reason. I'm fine with it when I have a reason to do it." So yeah, in a lot of ways, these books were the reason people felt safe to talk openly about the fact that they like D&D.
And then from these books spawned an entire, I don't want to say an entire machine, but it really is. Like we talked about earlier about Drizzt appearing in 17 novels. But then you also have other stuff like R.A. Salvatore went on to create entire worlds. One of Matt's favorite video games, the entire like world Bible for it was created by R.A. Salvatore. Kingdoms of Amalur would not have existed if R.A. Salvatore did not have successful novels in the 80s.
Yep. And, straight up, those are some of my favorite. That's my favorite video game. Well, not my favorite, but it's certainly up there. If I was making a list, it would always be in the top 4.
Yeah, it is. It cannot be overstated how important these novels were, but nobody knew how important they would become. And again, they're not the greatest literature that's ever been written. And yes, there are certain things that are derivative in them, as are many things. But
yeah, but at the same time, they do have a sense of that tongue being in the cheek.
They do.
The book knows what it's doing. It's not. There's nothing about this book that is ignorant of the fact that Tolkien is everywhere. It's like with the old statement: if you write literature in the South, you're going to always have you're going to always have Faulkner in the background. He is the mountain, and everyone writes around him. Tolkien is to this book that. Tolkien is the giant crystal shard sticking up, and everything is reflected from it, and it knows it, and it's fine with it. At least, if nothing else, it's more concise.
Yep.
And I don't know. I have a soft spot for these books. I think they're not great literature. They're not even always well written, but I came upon them at a time when getting reading material was pretty hard for a lot of reasons, and I managed to sneak these ones in through the blockade, and I enjoyed them.
Yeah, and the same thing, right? Like, and I will say that while Dragonlance existed before it, with the Hickmans, and it was definitely, it was one of the first things to ever be published under the Dungeons and Dragons novel banner. It was a hard slog, and it never made it to the New York Times bestseller, at least not until much later. So this breaking that barrier, this becoming so easily digestible, let people go back and read those and maybe find Dragonlance for the first time. And then it also pushed forward because in the 90s and late 80s, Mad Max was very popular, at least here. If for me in my youth, I remember it being very popular. And Dark Sun was something that also existed and had books published for it, which we haven't talked about. But that wouldn't have had a chance to flourish had this novel not sort of like crashed through that barrier and made it normal. We wouldn't have had D&D 3rd edition. We wouldn't have D&D 5th edition. Critical Role potentially may not have existed if this novel didn't break that barrier. The set of writings. If Ed Greenwood's world and the writing of Ari Salvatore didn't help begin that process of normalization, bringing it to a mainstream, out of the basements and into the light, out of Menzoberranzan and into the surface world, so to speak. We wouldn't have the rich tapestry of fantasy that we have now. A lot of other games may not have existed because Dungeons and Dragons may have at one point, and I don't know, I'm not saying this hyperbolically because I don't know the numbers, but without it becoming mainstream, there was a very real chance of it sort of fading away to nothingness or obscurity, more so than it already was, because again, it was relegated to hushed rooms and basements and dark, like embarrassment almost, over because people were hiding it because they didn't want to be beaten up. They didn't want to be called demon summoners or evildoers or Satan worshipers.
And also, I mean, we talked before at other places about how most tabletop role-playing games come from wargaming.
Mm-hmm.
Wargaming is not something that is widely spread out. It is not something everybody does. It's a Wales-oriented hobby.
Even
I have
the
enough
old school
money.
Days, yeah.
Yeah, even the old school stuff is I have the money to buy all these miniatures of Napoleonic figures and paint them so I can do my Battle of Leipzig again. So going from that to where D&D is now, I mean, there's so many choke points where without the popularity of stuff like the Icewind Dale trilogy, you just don't even have D&D anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Like D&D, I mean, thanks to somebody thinking that Buck Rogers in the 25th century was the IP to go all in on because she was descended from the guy who wrote it, TSR folded. And if that hadn't happened, if there hadn't been enough interest in them to have Wizards of the Coast come along and buy them out with their Magic the Gathering money, that would have been it. There wouldn't have been D&D. Would there have been other games? Sure. But there wouldn't be D&D.
Yeah.
And in a very real way, books like this made it possible for the hobby to survive.
With that, folks, I think that's a good way for us to end this episode. I do want to thank you for joining us. And as a reminder, Blizzard Watch is made possible due to your generous contributions at patreon.com/BlizzardWatch. Your continued support allows this site to grow and thrive. Blizzard Watch supporters enjoy exclusive benefits like early access to our podcast, a better chance at having your question answered on our queue, and an ads-free site experience. We do want to say that if you want us to answer any questions or cover any specific topics, be sure to send them in. You can send them into podcast@blizzardwatch.com. Specify the show that it is for in the subject line, as well as any special pronunciation of your name. You can also hit us up on Discord. We have the Q and Podcast Questions channel open to everybody. Same rules apply. If you are a Patreon subscriber, you can hit us up on the Patreon Q and Podcast Questions channel. This episode was brought to you by a large number of our patrons actually asking for an episode about the Icewind Dale trilogy. So
we love it when you do that. We will do. You ask us things, we will talk about them.
We absolutely will, as long as it's in our wheelhouse, so we can make it work. But we want you to send those in, and we do look there first as a way of saying thank you for helping us keep the lights on. If you cannot support us on Patreon, which we understand times are tough, and you might not be able to monetarily support us, we do have other ways that you can as well. I believe we have a free tier on Patreon, which gets you signed up for our newsletter. Highly recommend you do that if you can't give us any dollars at all. It lets you know when new stuff comes out, as well as upcoming shows or site news. And subscribers at that tier do actually help us. You can also share our content with your friends if you think that they might enjoy it. Leave a comment or give us a like or heart or thumbs up or whatever on whatever medium media you're consuming this through, or whatever platform you're consuming this through. That helps a metric ton as well. And yeah, just continue to stick around with us, and we appreciate it. But I think that's going to do it for us today, folks. We'll see you next week.